I am Alina, 30 years old, and a partner at a prominent architecture firm in Seattle. My husband, Julian, is 33. He operates as a senior marketing consultant, navigating our social circles with the confidence of a man who owns the skyline, though my salary anchors our life in a high-end waterfront penthouse. We sat in a private dining room at a bistro overlooking Elliott Bay for our 5th anniversary. Julian raised his glass of rye, the amber liquid catching the ambient light. His eyes locked onto mine with a sharp, challenging glint that lacked any warmth. The harbor water shimmered outside, casting restless, rhythmic shadows across the table where we sat surrounded by his entourage of friends and his mother, Diana. Stop acting like we are married. You do not get a say in where I go or who I am with. The room quieted. A few seconds passed before laughter rippled through the group. Diana broke the tension with a sharp, piercing cackle that echoed against the glass walls. "Oh, Julian, you always tell it like it is." She wiped a tear of amusement from her eye. The others joined the chorus of chuckles, validating his blatant disrespect. I kept my expression composed, hiding the ice forming in my chest. Looking at Diana, I saw the blueprint for Julian's cruelty. She taught him that disrespect was a form of personality. I was the primary earner. My salary paid the rent on the penthouse. I covered the utilities, the groceries, and the luxury travel Julian boasted about on his social media feeds. He felt a constant, desperate need to overcompensate with displays of aggressive dominance to mask his insecurity. He required his friends and his mother to see me as a subservient accessory who bowed to his whims. The truth was that he lived a lavish life funded by my grueling 70-hour work weeks. He wore bespoke suits purchased with my performance bonuses. Admitting this would shatter the fragile ego he had carefully curated for 5 years. Instead, he chose to humiliate me on the night we were meant to honor our partnership. Julian leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink. "I am taking a weekend trip to Costa Rica this Friday." He grinned at his friends, his posture radiating a smug, hollow sense of power. No nagging wives allowed, just the ocean and freedom. My pulse accelerated. Earlier that afternoon, I had checked our joint banking portal to prepare for our property tax payments. I had found a massive, unauthorized withdrawal from our high-yield savings account. "Is that why you drained the family estate fund today?" The room went cold. Julian's smirk vanished, replaced by a dark, simmering scowl. He slammed his glass onto the table. Liquid surged over the rim, darkening the linen tablecloth. "You are a penny-pinching control freak. You always ruin a good time by obsessing over every cent." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a heavy metal credit card, and tossed it across the table. It struck my plate with a sharp, metallic ring. The piece of plastic sat there, a physical manifestation of his disdain. The table fell silent. They waited for me to cry, to leave, to provide the spectacle Julian clearly wanted. They expected a breakdown. I reached forward and picked up the card. I signaled the server who stood near the doorway. "I will take the check for the entire table." When the server returned with the leather folder, I placed Julian's card inside. The bill totaled $2,000. I signed the receipt with a steady hand, never once breaking eye contact with my husband. His face flushed with frustration. He wanted a fight, a public display of the crazy, controlling wife, but I refused to give him the satisfaction. I handed the folder back, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my plate. A profound shift took hold within me. The love and loyalty I had nurtured for half a decade evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. He demanded total freedom. He had declared our marriage a burden. As I looked at him, surrounded by his sycophantic friends and his enabling mother, I made a silent vow. If he wants absolute freedom, he will get it in ways he cannot fathom. The ride home was a study in silence. Julian blasted the radio, radiating the smug satisfaction of his performance at the bistro. He did not look at me once, his eyes fixed on the city lights as if they existed solely to illuminate his brilliance. He was drunk on his own ego. We walked into the penthouse, and he headed straight for the master suite. He discarded his blazer and tie on the hardwood floor as he marched into the bathroom. The hum of the shower became my cue. For 5 years, I had maintained the domestic machine. I packed his bags for every conference and every getaway. It was an ingrained ritual that kept our lives running efficiently, and he expected it now. I pulled his dark leather duffel from the top shelf of the closet. I moved with mechanical precision, folding his shirts and trousers as if I were a ghost haunting my own life. He mentioned a rugged Costa Rican fishing trip, but I searched the hall closet for his gear, and the space was empty. No rods, no waterproof jackets, no tackle boxes. A man heading for the coast with specialized equipment would have at least one piece of gear in sight. I returned to the bedroom and unzipped the hidden interior compartment of his duffel. I expected a packing list or maybe a loose license. My fingers brushed against smooth, heavy paper. I pulled out a black envelope embossed with the logo of a luxury travel concierge. There was no outdoor equipment here. My heart beat a steady, unhurried rhythm against my ribs. I opened the flap. 2 first-class tickets to San Jose, departing Friday. The second name, printed in bold ink, was Chloe. I knew Chloe. She was a 24-year-old marketing assistant who worked under his direct supervision. She always laughed a fraction too long at his jokes during team dinners. She looked at him with a hunger that he had been too arrogant to hide from me. But the tickets were only the beginning. I found a receipt from a high-end jeweler in the downtown shopping district. It was dated yesterday. The transaction detailed a custom diamond tennis bracelet for $12,000. He had charged it to an account I did not recognize, but the billing address was our own. He was not just taking a subordinate on a luxury vacation. He was buying her devotion with my money. The audacity burned in my throat. He had thrown his card at me at dinner, calling me a control freak, while he used the funds I labored to earn to finance his illicit double life. I reached for my phone and photographed the tickets, the itinerary, and the receipt. I captured every barcode and every detail. I backed the files to my secure cloud storage. The cold realization hit as I looked at the totals. The flights, the resort, the bracelet, it all added up to the exact amount missing from the estate fund. I dropped the papers on the duvet. I sprinted to the study and booted my laptop. I ignored the checking accounts and dove straight into our joint high-yield savings. This was our down payment fund for the mountain home we planned to build. I had worked 80-hour weeks for 3 years, sacrificing travel and personal luxuries to secure that money. The balance read $62. He had stolen our future to pay for a girl who would not be his assistant by the end of the month. I closed the laptop and felt a terrifying, crystalline calm. I picked up my phone and dialed Diana. She answered on the second ring. "Alina, is everything all right? You sound distant." "I was just looking at the accounts to pay a contractor, Diana. The estate fund is empty. Did Julian mention any emergency investments?" Diana let out a sharp, condescending sigh. "Oh, Alina, stop being so dramatic. Successful men deal with high stakes. They need an outlet. Julian is under immense pressure. Chloe actually knows how to treat him. She makes him feel respected, unlike some work-obsessed executive who constantly makes him feel small." The truth dropped like an anvil. The entire family was in on the betrayal. Diana knew about the Mistress. She actively supported her son, draining my life savings to fund the affair. "Stop suffocating him with your constant monitoring." She hung up. I lowered the phone. The shower down the hall turned off. I zipped the duffel bag and walked out. Julian strolled into the bedroom, a towel wrapped carelessly around his waist, humming a cheerful, discordant tune. "Everything is packed and ready for your trip, Julian." He patted my cheek, entirely oblivious to the war room my mind had become. He fell asleep within minutes. The moment his heavy snores filled the room, I slipped into the study and locked the door. The wounded wife was dead. The partner was gone. I was now an executive preparing for a hostile takeover. I dialed my sister, Cassidy, as soon as the house settled into silence. She answered on the first ring. "I need you and Marcus here, now." "Is it him? Are you safe?" "I am fine, but he has crossed a line that does not exist on any map. Bring your husband. Marcus was a nightmare for anyone attempting to hide a digital footprint. As a lead cybersecurity analyst for a private data protection firm, he treated passwords like locks on a bank vault. Within 40 minutes, the soft crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced their arrival. They slipped through the patio door, their faces tight with concern. Cassidy pulled me into a fierce, wordless embrace. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She looked at me, saw the cold, hard resolve in my eyes, and stepped back to give Marcus room to work. He set his titanium laptop bag on the kitchen island and pulled out a series of drives and monitors. He didn't ask for the emotional narrative or demand to know why I had called him at midnight. He simply plugged his workstation into the residential router. Give me the administrative password. I recited the code. Marcus moved with the speed of an operator in a war zone. Julian possessed a bloated sense of his own cleverness, but his digital hygiene was non-existent. He performed all his shady financial maneuvering and clandestine messaging directly over our shared Wi-Fi, assuming his status made him invisible. Marcus bypassed the standard residential security protocols, pulling raw network logs with clinical ease. He spent 20 minutes isolating the data packets transmitted during the afternoon window when the estate fund vanished. He did not just move cash to an account, Marcus muttered, his eyes glued to the cascading lines of code. He routed the transfers through 3 rapid, automated hops before dumping the balance into a corporate holding company registered in Delaware. I looked at the monitor. The digital breadcrumbs Julian had left behind were glaring. He wasn't just pulling funds to pay for a vacation. He was establishing a business entity designed to look legitimate in a court of law. Marcus continued his sweep, his fingers dancing across the keys. The rhythmic clicking stopped. He leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he isolated a massive, anomaly-heavy data stream originating from Julian's personal laptop. He looked up, his professional detachment replaced by a look of sharp alarm. He isn't just a thief, Elena. He is committing corporate espionage. Marcus pointed to the highlighted logs. Julian's IP address had been aggressively pinging the encrypted servers of my architecture firm for the past month. Because I occasionally worked from home, the network recognized the credentials. Julian had swiped my administrative login. He has been downloading the proprietary database of your firm's most elite client list. These files are highly classified. They contain the event budgets, personal contact details, and upcoming project specs for your wealthiest clients. I stared at the glowing laptop. The scale of the betrayal hit with the force of an impact. Julian was not merely cheating. He was dismantling my life. He is using your credentials to download the lifeblood of your firm. I pieced the puzzle together. Julian and Chloe weren't just fleeing to Costa Rica for a romance. They were using the $60,000 estate fund as seed capital for a rival architecture and design firm. The Delaware holding company was their corporate shell. They planned to use my stolen VIP list to poach my top-tier clients, undercutting my firm with insider pricing, data Julian had harvested from my own files. He intended to destroy my professional reputation, trigger a massive data breach tied to my own login credentials, and leave me bankrupt while he rode off into a new life with his assistant. He had underestimated my resources and forgotten that I held the keys to the entire house, including the digital network. The final shreds of my heart withered and hardened into impenetrable steel. Any lingering grief I felt for a shattered marriage evaporated, replaced by the ruthless precision of a partner defending her firm against a hostile takeover. I looked at Marcus, matching his intensity with my own unyielding resolve. Can we weaponize this? If he thinks he is pulling my database, can we ensure he gets something else? Marcus leaned back, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. I can do much more than just alter it. I can build a cage around him. Marcus moved with the focus of an architect designing a structure meant to collapse. He intercepted the remaining data packets Julian had queued for download, expertly severing the connection to my authentic corporate server. My high-tier clients remained protected, shielded from any exposure. In place of the real files, Marcus rapidly constructed a sophisticated dummy database that mimicked the exact architecture of my firm's proprietary software. He populated this fake registry with thousands of fabricated client profiles. The names sounded incredibly prestigious, the project budgets looked mouth-wateringly massive, and the contact information linked only to dead-end automated directories. To the untrained eye, it was a gold mine of architectural industry secrets, perfectly packaged for a startup looking to poach top-tier business. But Marcus did not stop at creating fraudulent data. He embedded a microscopic, undetectable digital tracking beacon deep within the file architecture. The beacon operates silently in the background. It will ping a secure server I control the second those files are opened on any device. Julian believed he was downloading the master key to his glorious future as a wealthy business owner. In reality, he was downloading a meticulously crafted digital Trojan horse filled with absolute garbage. Marcus seamlessly swapped the files in the transfer queue and resumed the download process. Julian's external hard drive, sitting quietly in his study, hummed to life, happily ingesting the fabricated database without triggering a single local security alarm. What about the damage to his professional standing? Marcus cracked his knuckles, pulling his keyboard closer. I can do much more than just track him. I have a legal poison pill. He explained that Julian almost exclusively used his company-issued laptop for his personal business and his startup planning. Marcus wrote a specialized, highly aggressive script and attached it directly to the dummy database. The code remained dormant until the exact moment Julian double-clicked the folder to access his stolen treasure. Once triggered, the script would bypass his administrative privileges and send an automated, high-priority red alert directly to the corporate compliance and legal departments at his current marketing firm. It would flag his device for actively harboring stolen proprietary corporate data from a direct competitor, triggering an automatic lockdown of his entire machine. The moment he boots up his laptop in Costa Rica and tries to show that list to his mistress, he will detonate his own career. His corporate overlords will see the tracking beacon, identify the massive data breach, and freeze him out of their systems before he can close the window. We were turning his own employer into his executioner. Marcus ran a final diagnostic check on the malicious code, gave a satisfied nod, and locked the hidden script into place. The trap was invisible, armed, and lethal. Julian was sleeping soundly upstairs, dreaming of sandy beaches and a stolen fortune, completely unaware that he was about to carry a digital bomb across international lines. I walked over to the custom wine fridge built into the kitchen cabinetry and pulled out my most expensive bottle of vintage Bordeaux. My anniversary had been ruined, but my liberation was worth celebrating. I pulled 3 crystal goblets from the overhead rack and poured generous measures for myself, Cassidy, and Marcus. The deep ruby liquid caught the dim light of the kitchen as I passed the glasses across the island. Cassidy smiled, a fierce, protective expression shining on her face. Marcus closed his laptop with a sharp, satisfying click. We stood together in the quiet sanctuary of my home, bound by loyalty and a shared mission of righteous vengeance. I raised my crystal glass high, feeling an overwhelming surge of anticipation coursing through my veins. The tears were gone, replaced by the thrilling promise of justice. To his impending ruin. We clinked our glasses together. The delicate chiming sound rang out like a death knell for my sham of a marriage. We toasted in hushed voices to the spectacular destruction of Julian's life, knowing his arrogant quest for ultimate freedom would bring him nothing but complete ruin. As the clinking of glasses faded into the quiet kitchen, my mind shifted to the ultimate trump card I held against Julian. He strutted through our daily life under the delusion that he held ultimate authority over our living situation, because his signature appeared on the original residential lease. He frequently used that piece of paper as a psychological weapon, reminding me during minor disagreements that his name secured this waterfront penthouse. He felt entirely secure in his domestic kingdom. What my arrogant husband failed to realize was that legal tenancy and actual ownership were two entirely different stratospheres of power. 3 months prior, my beloved great-aunt had passed away, leaving me a substantial private inheritance strictly in my name. Knowing Julian's propensity for reckless, performative spending, I never disclosed the windfall. Instead, I quietly utilized an anonymous trust to execute a massive real estate maneuver. I purchased the exact property management firm that owned our entire block of waterfront townhouses and penthouses. I was no longer just his wife sharing a leased space. I was the supreme shareholder of the holding company. I was quite literally his landlord. He had been paying his half of the rent directly into an account that eventually funneled right back to my asset portfolio. This secret drastically altered the entire power dynamic of our impending separation. While Julian plotted to steal my savings and leave me scrambling for an apartment, I already held the absolute legal authority to strip the roof right off his head. Thursday morning arrived with a biting wind off the sound, perfectly matching my demeanor. I bypassed my firm's office entirely and took a private elevator up to the top floor of a towering glass skyscraper downtown. I walked into the sleek, minimalist boardroom of Seattle's most ruthless real estate litigator. He was a notorious predator, a man who specialized in dismantling fraudulent assets and orchestrating airtight evictions. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. I dropped a thick manila folder and an encrypted flash drive onto the center of his polished glass desk. I laid out the meticulous paper trail of the stolen estate fund and the raw network logs showcasing Julian's systematic theft of my firm's proprietary database. I watched the attorney's eyes scan the digital timestamps and bank routing numbers. He analyzed the magnitude of Julian's criminal stupidity with clinical precision. Julian had left a neon sign pointing directly to his illicit activities. The attorney leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers as he processed the evidence of theft, infidelity, and corporate treason. I need maximum retaliation. Use every single legal mechanism at your disposal to ensure he never recovers from this. The attorney let a predatory, razor-sharp smile spread across his face as he reviewed the details of Julian's new corporate filing. He tapped a manicured finger against the LLC registration, documents Marcus had pulled from the public database. Julian, in his rush to establish a rival firm with his mistress, made a monumentally stupid error. To save on commercial registration fees, he tethered his business entity directly to your residential address. He pointed out that this action explicitly violated strict municipal commercial zoning laws. More importantly, it constituted a severe, immediate breach of his residential lease agreement. The contract prohibited tenants from operating an unapproved commercial enterprise or housing stolen data on the premises. Because you own the holding company, I represent the landlord. We do not have to wait for a lengthy divorce proceeding to force him out. The lease violation grants us the immediate legal authority to bypass standard tenant protections. Julian had essentially handed me the exact loophole needed to legally execute a swift, merciless eviction. By tying his stolen funds and his fraudulent corporate espionage to the property, he had weaponized the lease against himself. The trap was no longer just digital. It was rooted in unyielding real estate law. We initiated the kill shot. I sat in his office for 3 hours, drafting an impenetrable mountain of legal paperwork. First, we finalized a 24-hour emergency eviction notice citing the egregious commercial lease violations. Second, we prepared a comprehensive set of divorce papers detailing the adultery, the stolen funds, and the gross marital misconduct. Finally, we drafted an emergency ex parte injunction to be filed the moment the courthouse opened on Friday morning. The injunction, backed by the proof of the stolen money, would legally compel the banks to instantly freeze all of Julian's personal accounts. He would have zero access to any liquid capital. We synchronized the execution timeline with military precision. Julian was scheduled to depart for his Costa Rican getaway on Friday morning. Everything was primed to activate the exact second his commercial flight took off. He would be trapped in a metal tube, cruising at 30,000 feet, utterly unreachable and completely powerless. Friday morning arrived with a blinding glare reflecting off the harbor windows, mirroring the sharp tension humming beneath my skin. Julian bounded down the hardwood stairs at 7 sharp, radiating a sickeningly bright energy. He had swapped his usual tailored marketing suits for expensive resort wear, looking every inch the man preparing to conquer a tropical paradise. He strutted around the granite island, loudly humming an upbeat tune as he shoved a set of freshly polished golf clubs into a heavy-duty travel case. His arrogance felt suffocating, filling every cubic inch of our penthouse. He truly believed he was the smartest person in any room, orchestrating a flawless double life right under my nose. After wrestling the zipper closed on his duffel, he turned to me with a condescending smirk. He reached out and patronizingly patted my cheek, his fingers lingering just a fraction too long. He casually instructed me to make sure I handled the dry cleaning and organized his winter coats, while he was away on his grueling, rugged fishing excursion. To top off the performance, he adjusted his designer sunglasses and lied straight to my face, insisting that he would be entirely off the grid and would have absolutely no cell service out on the water. I absorbed his pathetic lies without allowing a single muscle in my face to twitch. I played my role as the beautiful, oblivious wife with an Oscar-worthy execution. I forced a warm, gentle smile to my lips, burying the absolute inferno of rage burning behind my eyes. Moving to the espresso machine, I methodically prepared his favorite dark roast blend, securing the lid on his insulated travel mug. I walked over and handed the steaming coffee directly into his waiting hand, ensuring my grip was steady and my gaze remained open and supportive. He took a sip, completely blind to the lethal calculations turning over in my mind. I adjusted the collar of his lightweight jacket, smoothing down the premium fabric with mock affection, relishing the dramatic irony of the moment. I told him he had been working incredibly hard lately and deserved a break from the stresses of his daily life. I looked deeply into his eyes, projecting nothing but sincerity as I delivered my final line of our 5-year marriage. I told him to go out there and enjoy every single moment of his freedom. He chuckled, clearly thrilled by my gullibility, and promised he would catch a trophy fish just for me. He grabbed the handle of his bag and his clubs, turning his back on me to head toward the entryway. He was so consumed by the thrill of his impending rendezvous with Chloe that he completely failed to notice the predatory chill settling over the room. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. The sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot through the silent foyer. The sheer finality of that sound reverberated in my chest. I did not move. I stood perfectly, unnervingly still in the center of the kitchen, counting the seconds in my head with rhythmic, mechanical precision. 1, 2, 3. I focused my hearing on the street outside, filtering out the ambient hum of the stainless steel refrigerator. 4, 5, 6. The muted rumble of a luxury sedan pulling away from the curb vibrated through the frosted window panes. 7, 8, 9. I listened as the tires crunched over the pavement, the engine noise steadily fading as the vehicle accelerated toward the airport. 10. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and entirely mine. The toxic presence that had suffocated this house for years was officially in transit. The meticulously constructed illusion of Julian's perfect life was currently rolling down the highway, entirely disconnected from the reality of the impending slaughter. He was locked in a moving vehicle, completely unaware that the invisible countdown timer on his stolen empire had struck 0. The suffocating weight of my domestic prison lifted instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating adrenaline of a corporate executioner. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my phone, the screen glowing brightly in the quiet kitchen. I pulled up the encrypted messaging app and opened the chat thread with my real estate attorney. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I typed a single decisive word: execute. I watched the read receipt confirm delivery, knowing that the emergency eviction notice, the divorce papers, and the bank freezes were instantly hitting the courts. Next, I switched to the secure channel established with Marcus. He had been standing by all morning, monitoring the digital traffic. I sent him his specific launch command: armed. In a fraction of a second, the tracking beacon embedded in the dummy database went fully live, and the poison pill code was primed to detonate Julian's corporate existence the moment he opened his laptop in Costa Rica. With the trap sprung, I moved to the final phase. I bypassed my contacts and placed a direct voice call to a specialized, rapid-response relocation team I had retained on a massive premium. The dispatcher answered on the first ring. I stared around the penthouse, my voice devoid of emotion as I gave the order. "Bring the trucks, now." Exactly 58 minutes after I ended the call, a fleet of 3 unmarked box trucks roared onto my street. A specialized crew of 12 highly efficient relocation experts piled out, practically jogging up the steps. They did not ask questions. They were paid for speed, discretion, and obedience. I met the crew chief at the threshold, armed with a clipboard and a color-coded floor plan I had drafted. I pointed toward the master bedroom, the study, and the hall closets. Strip the penthouse of anything belonging to my soon-to-be ex-husband. They moved with terrifying, beautiful military precision. A wave of men swept through the living space, zeroing in solely on Julian's existence. I stood in the foyer, acting as an elite battlefield commander, orchestrating a domestic strike. I pointed a finger at his framed photographs, his custom leather recliner, his collection of imported cigars, and his designer shoe racks. If Julian bought it, touched it, or claimed it, it was systematically ripped from the walls and shelves. The rapid thud of heavy boots became the glorious soundtrack of my liberation. The crew worked with ruthless efficiency, clearing out the physical debris of a man who thought he owned me. In the master's suite, I watched with immense satisfaction as they tackled his offensively overpriced wardrobe. Julian prized his appearance above all else, regularly boasting about his custom-tailored Italian threads. Now, his silk suits, crisp Egyptian cotton shirts, and imported cashmere ties were unceremoniously yanked from their velvet hangers. The movers did not bother with protective garment bags or delicate folding. They grabbed everything in massive, careless fistfuls and shoved them aggressively into the cheapest, thinnest corrugated cardboard boxes available. I walked over to his accessory drawer, scooping up his collection of heavy diamond-encrusted watches and gold cufflinks, dropping them into a plastic grocery bag like worthless trinkets, before tossing them into a crate of tangled charging cables. Downstairs, the crew dismantled his high-end gaming consoles, ripping HDMI cords from the wall and tossing the machines into boxes alongside his scattered gym shoes and half-empty protein tubs. With every taped-up box that passed me on a heavy metal hand truck, I felt a physical weight lifting entirely from my chest. For 5 years, his bloated ego had consumed every square inch of this property, slowly draining my energy and suppressing my identity. Now, I was watching the tangible debris of a toxic, parasitic marriage being purged from my sanctuary. The oppressive atmosphere he cultivated vanished, packed away into flimsy brown cartons headed for permanent exile. The loaded trucks departed in a synchronized convoy, rumbling away toward a destination far removed from the manicured, upscale neighborhood. I had personally driven to a desolate industrial park on the outskirts of the city 2 days prior, specifically searching for the most dilapidated facility I could locate. I found what I needed in a rusted, corrugated metal complex nestled beneath a roaring highway overpass. The facility was non-climate controlled, meaning Julian's expensive electronics and delicate silks would be subjected to the damp, musty chill of the Pacific Northwest. The moving crew backed their trucks up to a grimy, oil-stained rolling door and dumped the boxes onto the cracked concrete floor of a small 10x10 unit. They stacked the cardboard haphazardly, crushing the cheaper boxes under the immense weight of his leather recliner and golf training equipment. There was zero organization and zero care given to his prized possessions. Once the final box of his miserable life was shoved inside, the heavy metal door was slammed downward with a deafening metallic screech. I walked into the dimly lit, barred leasing office and slapped my credit card onto the scratched laminate counter. I prepaid the rental fee for 1 month, ensuring that if he did not pay the subsequent bills, his entire curated life would be legally auctioned off to the highest bidder. I locked the heavy brass padlock myself, slipping the only existing key deep into my coat pocket. By the time I returned to the penthouse, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long, triumphant shadows across the empty driveway. Marcus was already waiting on the front porch, flanked by a 3-man private security team carrying heavy steel toolboxes. I gave them the green light, and they immediately went to work systematically dismantling the physical vulnerabilities of the property. The old deadbolts and brass door handles, the ones Julian's key still perfectly fit, were aggressively drilled out and tossed into the recycling bin. In their place, Marcus's technicians installed heavy-duty, military-grade biometric locking mechanisms on the front entrance, the patio, and the garage interior access door. These sleek, black titanium scanners required a specific encrypted fingerprint and a rotating digital passcode to disengage the reinforced steel latch. Marcus integrated the new hardware directly into my upgraded home network, linking the perimeter defense to a series of high-definition, motion-activated cameras, capturing every possible angle of the property. The entire installation took less than 2 hours, transforming my previously vulnerable home into an impenetrable digital and physical fortress. I pressed my thumb against the cool glass of the new scanner, listening to the satisfying, heavy electronic thud of the steel bolt snapping firmly into place. I stood in the center of my silent, immaculately clean living room, breathing in the fresh, uncontaminated air. The locks were changed, his possessions were banished, and his digital footprint was completely annihilated. Julian had officially been erased. The crisp, unnerving silence of my Saturday morning shattered just before 9 o'clock. Heavy, aggressive pounding echoed through the grand foyer, rattling the frosted glass panels of my newly reinforced entrance. I did not need to check the high-definition security feed to know exactly who was launching this desperate suburban siege. Julian's parents, Diana and Robert, had arrived. They stood on my pristine bluestone porch, their faces flushed with indignant rage, demanding immediate entry. Robert repeatedly jammed his thumb into the illuminated doorbell, while Diana hammered her manicured fists against the heavy oak frame. Their voices, usually dripping with country club elitism and condescension, had sharpened into a frantic, shrill screech that echoed down the quiet, tree-lined street. They were loudly demanding to know why their precious son was currently stranded in a foreign country without a single functioning line of credit. Julian had clearly called them in a panic from Costa Rica after discovering his accounts were entirely locked down and drained of liquid assets. He had fed them some fabricated sob story, playing the ultimate victim of a vindictive, controlling wife. Robert yelled through the thick door, ordering me to open up and fix the terrible banking error I had supposedly caused. He bellowed that Julian was facing extreme public humiliation at a luxury resort. They expected me to simply bow my head, unlock the fortress, and instantly restore their golden boy's unlimited access to my financial portfolio. I remained perfectly still in the center of the foyer, holding my phone and watching their pathetic meltdown unfold on the crystal-clear, high-definition security feed. I absolutely refused to disengage the military-grade biometric locks to let those toxic enablers step 1 foot inside my sanctuary. Instead, I tapped the microphone icon on my screen, activating the 2-way audio system integrated into the smart doorbell. My voice projected outward, completely flat and devoid of any emotional warmth, slicing through the crisp winter air. I calmly informed them that they were trespassing on private property and instructed them to immediately step away from the entrance. Diana gasped dramatically at the sound of my disembodied voice, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She leaned directly into the camera lens, her eyes flashing with venomous intent. She began screaming a barrage of vicious threats, swearing that she would destroy my personal and professional reputation across every social circle in Seattle. She declared I was a monster for deliberately starving her son, painting a ridiculous picture of Julian wasting away on a sun-drenched beach. She promised to call my corporate superiors, my clients, and every mutual friend we shared to expose me as a vindictive, unstable woman who was maliciously withholding funds from her hardworking husband. She ranted about my supposed cruelty, totally blinded by the delusional belief that she held the ultimate upper hand in this domestic war. I let Diana exhaust her lungs, allowing her shrieking threats to hang in the frigid morning air for a few agonizing seconds. I did not raise my voice or offer a single syllable of defense. Instead, I utilized the exact digital weapon Marcus had helped me secure weeks prior. With a few swift taps on my smartphone, I accessed a specific audio file hidden deep in my encrypted drive. I bypassed the standard intercom microphone and routed the raw audio directly through the powerful exterior speaker system we had just installed. The crisp, undeniable sound of Diana's own voice suddenly blasted across the entire block. It was a recording from a supposedly private lunch she had shared with Julian 3 weeks ago. In the crystal-clear audio, Diana was cheerfully congratulating her son on finding a much younger, more vibrant companion. Even worse, the recording captured her explicitly advising Julian on the best way to quietly funnel the estate fund out of our joint accounts without triggering any fraud alerts. The entire neighborhood was treated to the sound of Robert chuckling in the background, fully endorsing the theft of my money to finance Julian's illicit getaway with his mistress. I cranked the volume to the maximum. The horrifying proof of their deep complicity echoed off the neighboring houses, exposing their profound moral bankruptcy to every resident currently walking their dog or retrieving their morning newspaper. The shock value was instantaneous. The color drained from both of their faces as the recording abruptly ended, leaving a deafening, terrifying silence in its wake. Diana stumbled backward, her manicured hands flying to cover her mouth in horror, realizing the entire neighborhood had just heard her orchestrate a massive financial crime against her own daughter-in-law. Robert looked physically ill, his aggressive bravado evaporating as he stared wide-eyed at the small blinking camera lens. I activated my microphone one final time, my tone dripping with lethal precision. The audio file is already in the possession of Seattle's most ruthless litigation attorney. You have 5 seconds to turn around, walk to your vehicle, and permanently vacate my property. If you ever attempt to contact me again, I will name both of you as active co-conspirators in a massive civil fraud and embezzlement lawsuit. I will drag your pristine reputation through a brutal, highly publicized legal battle that will decimate your retirement savings. The countdown began. 1, 2. They did not wait for 3. Robert grabbed Diana by the arm, and they scrambled down the bluestone pathway, nearly tripping over themselves in their haste. They threw themselves into their luxury sedan, the tires screeching against the asphalt as they fled in absolute terror, utterly broken and thoroughly humiliated. The humid air in the Costa Rican resort suite felt stifling compared to the tropical paradise just beyond the balcony doors. Julian sat on the edge of the plush bed, his posture rigid with a mix of adrenaline and desperate greed. Chloe slept in the adjacent room, entirely unaware that their expensive getaway was about to become the epicenter of a catastrophic financial collapse. Julian ignored the lingering guilt and the mounting anxiety of the credit card declines he had suffered earlier that afternoon. He was far too focused on his objective. He clicked the power button on his work laptop, the screen illuminating his face in the dim room as it cycled through the boot sequence. His hands shook slightly as he navigated the folders, his eyes scanning for the heavily encrypted file labeled VIP Client Manifest 2026. He did not know that this file was merely a digital mirage, a carefully constructed piece of bait I had specifically designed to exploit his arrogance. He believed that by delivering this list to the broker waiting on his messaging channel, he would secure an immediate, untraceable cash advance to cover their mounting resort debts. He hovered his cursor over the file, convinced he was moments away from pulling off the power move that would solidify his financial independence and leave me with nothing. Miles away in the dim glow of my study, Marcus sat hunched over a bank of monitors, his eyes tracking a pulsating red cursor as it moved through the virtual network tunnels. He held a lukewarm coffee in one hand, his posture entirely focused on the incoming data streams from our remote connection in San Jose. Suddenly, The screen flickered, indicating the specific access point he had been waiting for all evening. Julian had initiated the file transfer. Marcus watched with clinical fascination as Julian blindly clicked the file, completely unaware that he had just stepped into a high-tech mousetrap. As soon as Julian opened the directory, the poison pill I had instructed Marcus to embed went active. The script did not simply transmit the data. It executed a deep system override that immediately pinged back the exact MAC address of the device, while simultaneously corrupting any further attempts at data transmission. Marcus watched the background processes light up, indicating that the system was now silently harvesting Julian's system metadata. We were no longer just catching him in the act of theft. We were effectively turning his own machine into a tracking device that would provide the irrefutable evidence required for the authorities to initiate an immediate investigation. The reaction within the corporate IT infrastructure was swift and brutal. As soon as the poison pill bypassed the local network and synced with the main office server in Seattle, a global security alert triggered across every terminal in the building. Sirens blared silently in the form of flashing red notification banners, alerting the internal response team to a major breach in progress. The network security protocols recognized the unauthorized access attempt from an unrecognized foreign IP address. The system instantly engaged the scorched earth protocol, remotely triggering a hard lockdown on Julian's laptop. The screen on his computer went black, then flashed a series of emergency administrative commands, effectively bricking the operating system to prevent further tampering. Behind the scenes, the forensic software was already working in tandem with the breach notification, permanently capturing the device's geolocation, the physical IP address assigned to the resort's router, and a comprehensive, unalterable log of the specific files he had attempted to exfiltrate. The trap had not only locked him out of his illicit business venture, it had generated a digital signature that anchored him to the scene of the crime. The final blow to Julian's fragile world arrived in the form of a buzzing smartphone resting on the nightstand. Julian snatched the device, expecting a notification about a pending wire transfer from his broker, but his face paled as he saw the name of his current CEO flashing on the caller ID. He swiped to answer, his voice already pitching into a frantic defense, but he was silenced within seconds. "Pack your things. Internal investigation confirmed your active involvement in corporate espionage. We identified you as the source of the data breach. The files are currently being handed over to federal authorities, and we have notified the resort security of your location. Your company badges are deactivated, your stock options are voided, and any attempt to return to the office will result in immediate arrest." Julian stood in the center of the dark, expensive suite, his phone still gripped tightly in his trembling hand. The silence of the room filled with the crushing weight of a life that had irrevocably evaporated. The bedroom door clicked open. Chloe stood in the threshold, the soft ambient light from the hallway casting long shadows across her face. She had been woken by the frantic pleading tone of Julian's voice during the brief phone call and had listened closely enough to hear the devastating finality of the CEO's words. The sleepy, pampered mistress routine vanished from her demeanor, replaced by a cold, sharp realization of the catastrophic reality unfolding before her. She stared at Julian, who stood clutching the dead phone, his face a pale, sweating mask of absolute defeat. In that singular moment, the grand illusion he had carefully constructed disintegrated into dust. Chloe realized she was not standing across from a brilliant, wealthy corporate mastermind preparing to launch a rival empire. She was staring at a bankrupt, unemployed felon who had just committed high-level corporate treason and dragged her directly into the blast radius of a massive investigation. The getaway, the promises of luxury, the startup capital supposedly stolen from the estate fund, it all crashed down around her. She recognized that the stolen wealth he had paraded around was entirely gone, seized by the very authorities now hunting him. Her eyes narrowed with a terrifying, self-preserving clarity as she calculated the immediate legal peril he had selfishly anchored to her life. She knew she had to cut ties immediately. The pristine, tranquil atmosphere of the luxury resort lobby shattered 10 minutes later. Chloe marched furiously past the cascading indoor waterfalls and imported marble pillars. Her voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings as Julian scrambled frantically behind her, desperately begging her to keep her voice down. She spun around near the front desk, completely disregarding the elegant surroundings, and unleashed a torrent of vitriol that brought the entire lobby to a standstill. "You are a pathetic, incompetent fraud. I hope you enjoy prison." She screamed at him for his espionage and his stolen credit cards, ensuring every wealthy guest within earshot understood exactly who he was. She did not care who heard. Her only objective was to publicly sever herself from his sinking ship. "I am not going down with you." Julian tried to grab her arm, pleading for her to wait so he could explain, but she violently shoved him away. Several vacationing tourists, recognizing the sheer entertainment value of the chaotic scene, pulled out their smartphones. The red recording lights blinked from multiple angles as guests eagerly captured the humiliating spectacle of a ruined man being brutally berated by his much younger mistress. Chloe did not waste another breath on the broken man cowering in front of the concierge desk. She had already packed her designer luggage with frantic, ruthless efficiency. Ignoring Julian's pathetic, tearful apologies, she marched directly to the front desk and demanded a private car to the airport. "You are on your own, Julian. Enjoy your federal indictment." She stepped into the waiting car, the doors shutting with a definitive thud, leaving Julian standing entirely alone in the lobby, surrounded by his luggage and absolute ruin. Julian stood paralyzed in the lavish lobby, his reality collapsing. The hotel's security guards circled closer, their faces hardened into expressions of professional impatience. He possessed zero cash, no functioning credit cards, and a deactivated corporate phone that served only as a paperweight. Trembling, he sank onto a stone bench near the entrance and dialed the only people left on the planet who might tolerate his failures. "Dad, I am ruined. They fired me. Chloe walked out and the hotel is throwing me into the street. I have nothing." Robert's voice did not offer a rescue. It was thick with the terror of a man watching his own life incinerate. "The federal investigators are at our house, Julian. They are tearing through our manufacturing business because of the false references you used. You have endangered our entire family legacy. Do not call this number again." The dial tone echoed in the lobby, sealing his isolation. Julian spent the next 14 hours in the middle seat of a budget airline, his suit wrinkled and sweat-stained, his body aching from dehydration. The tropical humidity gave way to the biting, gray chill of Seattle as he trudged out of CTAC Airport. His head throbbed with a relentless pressure, but his mind remained fixated on a singular, toxic goal: Alina. He blamed her for every catastrophe. In his mind, her refusal to accept his financial theft was the sole reason for his termination and Chloe's departure. He tightened his grip on his battered carry-on, his knuckles turning white. He intended to unleash a hurricane of rage the second he walked through the penthouse door, fully prepared to punish her for daring to disrupt his master plan. He pulled out his phone, his thumbs hammering aggressively against the cracked screen to the family group chat. He clung to the delusion that his parents would eventually rush to his side. "Flight lands at 5:00 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" He stood on the concrete island, shivering in the winter air, watching the traffic. He felt a fleeting surge of his old arrogance, convinced that he would eventually bully his way back into comfort. The phone buzzed. He swiped, a smug smile forming on his lips. "Try Uber." The screen remained inactive after that. Richard and Diana, terrified of being named co-conspirators in the federal audit, offered no aid. A harsh gust of wind whipped across the pickup zone, forcing Julian to accept the reality. He authorized the exorbitant surge pricing charge on his last surviving personal card. Watching his final financial lifeline evaporate, he threw himself into the backseat of a sedan and slammed the door. The ride was spent marinating in a stew of vindictive rage. He watched the Seattle skyline pass by, meticulously plotting the words he would use to throw Alina out onto the street. He built a fantasy where he would reclaim his territory and force her to pay for his depleted accounts. He remained completely blind to the brick wall he was about to hit at full speed. The car stopped in front of the waterfront penthouse. Julian leaped out, grabbing his luggage with a violent jerk. He stormed up the walkway, his chest puffed out with a manufactured sense of authority. He reached into his coat, retrieved his keyring, and jammed his key toward the brass cylinder. The metal scraped against a flat, smooth surface. He paused, brow furrowing, and peered at the entryway. The brass fixture was gone. A sleek, black biometric security pad pulsed with a faint blue light. The solid oak door appeared heavily reinforced, lacking any traditional keyhole. He stared at the imposing hardware, the first cold spike of genuine panic piercing his entitlement. He shoved his thumb flat against the glowing glass, expecting the deadbolts to slide back. Instead, the console emitted a harsh, singular buzz and flashed an unforgiving red. Access denied. He wiped his sweaty thumb against his coat and jammed it against the sensor again. The red light flashed, accompanied by the same rejection tone. Desperate, he punched his old security code into the keypad. The system locked him out instantly, initiating a cooldown sequence. The reality of his powerlessness shattered his delusions. He dropped his luggage and began pounding his fists against the oak, the sound echoing hollowly across the patio. "Elena, open the door, stop this right now." I sat comfortably in the warm glow of the living room, a generous pour of aged Cabernet in my hand, watching his meltdown on the tablet monitor. I waited until his frantic pounding slowed and his knuckles began to bruise against the wood. I reached forward and tapped the microphone icon. A soft chime sounded outside, freezing Julian in his tracks. "Can I help you, sir? You are currently trespassing on private property." His head whipped toward the camera, his mouth hanging open in shock. The ice in my delivery hit him like a physical blow. He lunged toward the lens, spittle flying as he screamed that this was his home. He threatened to tear the door off its hinges, rattling the handle with both hands in a pathetic display of intimidation. I took a relaxed sip of my wine, watching him expend his remaining energy. I pressed the microphone icon for the final time, my voice dropping to a calm, dangerous whisper. "I suggest you turn around." Julian spun, his mouth open to hurl another barrage of threats, but the words died in his throat. Standing at the bottom of the steps was Silas, the president of the Homeowners Association. He was a retired corporate litigator who possessed zero tolerance for any disruption of the peace. He marched up the pathway with the grim determination of a general. Julian's face flushed crimson as he tried to adjust his wrinkled suit, hoping to offer a fabricated excuse. Silas did not offer a greeting. His cold, authoritative gaze swept over Julian's disheveled appearance, the luggage, and the bruised knuckles. He reached into his overcoat and withdrew a thick manila envelope, thrusting it into Julian's chest. "I have been deputized to deliver this emergency eviction notice and a court-approved temporary restraining order. You are not allowed within 500 feet of these premises, effective immediately." "This is a mistake. My name is on the lease." Silas smiled, his eyes devoid of any sympathy. "The property is owned by a private holding company. Elena is the sole proprietor. She is not your co-tenant. She is your landlord." Julian's jaw worked silently. He stared at the legal documents in his trembling hands, the undeniable proof of his ruin staring back in black ink. Silas pulled out his phone, making it clear he was calling the police to report a trespasser. Defeated and humiliated, Julian grabbed his carry-on. He did not look back. He turned and began the agonizing walk of shame down the street into the freezing darkness. The biting wind howled through the barren suburban streets as Julian trudged forward, his dress shoes slipping dangerously on the icy pavement. Shivering, he ducked beneath the flickering amber glow of a street lamp to examine the thick stack of legal documents he still clutched. His eyes scanned the dense legalese, bypassing the brutal reality of the restraining order to find the inventory addendum. At the bottom of the second page, printed in stark font, was an address for a self-storage facility located deep in the gritty industrial heart of the city's south side. According to the notice, Every personal belonging he possessed had been removed from the penthouse and dumped into a rented locker. He checked his pockets, finding only a handful of crumpled bills he had scavenged from his carry-on during his layover. A rideshare was no longer an option, and walking 30 miles in a blizzard was a death sentence. Swallowing a massive, jagged lump of degradation, Julian dragged his suitcase toward the nearest transit stop. He waited 40 minutes in the freezing darkness before boarding a dilapidated city bus. He sank into a cracked vinyl seat, surrounded by weary night shift workers, the sharp stench of stale smoke and bleach assaulting his senses. The man who had demanded first-class service just a week prior now stared blankly out the grimy window, embarking on a jolting ride toward the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. The bus hissed to a halt, depositing Julian onto a desolate sidewalk surrounded by towering chain-link fences and rusted razor wire. He approached the sprawling storage complex, a bleak concrete fortress illuminated by harsh fluorescent floodlights that cast long, eerie shadows. Bypassing the unmanned kiosk, he navigated the labyrinth of freezing corridors until he arrived at the corrugated door of Unit 402. He punched the access code provided in the eviction notice into the rusted keypad, wincing as the heavy door groaned upward on ungreased tracks. A single bare bulb flickered to life, revealing the reality of his net worth. There were no garment bags or protective cases. His entire life had been aggressively purged and shoved into a dozen mismatched, sagging cardboard boxes. Julian ripped open the nearest flap, letting out a strangled gasp as he found his bespoke Italian wool suits brutally crumpled and shoved together like worthless rags. He tore into a second box, digging through a chaotic pile of tangled neckties and frayed cables. At the bottom, crushed beneath the muddy soles of his sneakers, lay his collection of luxury watches. The crystal face of his favorite chronograph was cracked. The expensive leather bands were scratched and tangled in dirty shoelaces. The curated image of wealth he had spent a decade cultivating had been reduced to a pile of trash in a freezing concrete tomb. Desperation eclipsed the last fraction of pride Julian retained. Standing amidst the ruins of his wardrobe, he pulled out his phone and dialed his parents' number for the second time. He needed a couch, a basement floor, anything to escape the biting cold. The line rang 3 times before Robert picked up. Julian opened his mouth to beg, but Robert cut him off with a visceral, booming shout that forced Julian to pull the receiver away from his ear. Federal investigators are dissecting the corporate espionage case, and they just expanded the net. You used my company as a false reference to secure your startup capital. The authorities are at our door right now because of your reckless greed. Do not call this number again. The dial tone echoed in the concrete unit, sealing his isolation. Julian stood entirely alone, the crushing reality of his situation pressing down on his chest. He possessed $0. Every bank account was frozen. His career was obliterated, and his family had slammed their doors to protect their own skin. He was a pariah, stripped of the lifestyle and arrogance that defined his existence. He dragged 3 heavy golf bags into the corner, creating a pathetic, uneven mattress over the freezing cement. He pulled a wrinkled wool overcoat from one of the boxes and wrapped it tightly around his shivering shoulders. Curled up on the lumpy canvas, surrounded by the remnants of his fake wealth, Julian closed his eyes and welcomed his new reality. The harsh glare of the Monday morning sun pierced the thin gap beneath the door, dragging Julian from a restless sleep. He peeled his stiff, aching body off the pile of bags, his muscles screaming against the concrete. He reached down to haul the heavy metal door upward. Standing directly outside the threshold was a man in a nondescript trench coat holding a thick manila folder. Julian blinked, his exhausted mind struggling to process the presence of another human. Before he could speak, the stranger thrust the envelope into Julian's chest and announced that he had been officially served. The process server turned and marched down the aisle, leaving Julian standing in the freezing draft. He ripped open the envelope. Meline was not simply dissolving their marriage, she was executing a financial autopsy. The primary petition demanded the unconditional return of the $60,000 he had drained, categorizing the withdrawal as malicious marital fraud. She had weaponized every one of his arrogant mistakes against him. The legal documents weighed heavy in Julian's hands, the ink staining his fingers like fresh blood. He bypassed his alienated family and dialed the direct line of the high-priced defense attorney he had retained weeks ago, a man known for making severe legal liabilities vanish. The line connected. "I need intervention. The bank accounts are frozen. The feds are circling my father's business because of the references I gave. You have to launch a counteroffensive." The attorney interrupted with a cold, professional detachment that froze Julian's blood. Defending a client facing simultaneous federal espionage charges, marital fraud, and asset seizure requires a massive infusion of capital. "I require a $25,000 retainer wired into the firm's trust account by the end of business today." "Everything is frozen. Alina's holding company seized my liquid assets. I can get you the money in a few days." "My firm does not operate on charity. Good luck with the indictments." The line went dead. The silence of the storage unit amplified the hum of the distant highway. Julian sank onto an overturned cardboard box, his expensive suit snagging on a jagged edge of the container. As the scale of Alina's intelligence dawned on him, he replayed the events of the week. The failed trip, the poisoned digital manifest, the biometric lock, and the divorce filing. Every disaster acted as a synchronized, orchestrated trap. He had spent months believing he played a masterful game, moving pieces with superiority. He understood the catastrophic depth of his arrogance now. He had never been playing chess with Alina. She simply bought the board and waited for him to checkmate himself. Across town, Chloe experienced her own brand of suffocating panic. Her termination from the marketing firm was only the opening salvo. That morning, she had received formal notice that federal investigators were dissecting the digital manifest and the corporate espionage conspiracy Julian had dragged her into. She paced her hardwood floors with a glass of vodka in her trembling hand. The promises Julian had whispered in the sun-drenched suite in Costa Rica, the talk of hostile takeovers and endless wealth, evaporated. He was broke, blacklisted, and radioactive. She had tied her professional star to a man sinking like a stone, and she felt the blast radius of his failure closing in. Self-preservation kicked in. She had no intention of facing federal prison time for a man who could not even afford a retainer. Trembling, she realized there was only one escape route. She had to throw Julian to the wolves. She rushed to her desk and opened her laptop. She composed the most desperate message of her life. She addressed the email to Alina, abandoning any pretense of pride. She outlined a transactional plea for mercy. She offered a specific archive of private text messages, encrypted emails, and voice memos proving Julian had premeditated the theft of the estate fund weeks before their trip. The files contained his own arrogant admission that he drained the assets specifically to finance the corporate theft. In exchange for this smoking gun, she requested a non-negotiable concession: immunity from the civil suit and the corporate liability claims. She framed the betrayal as a mutual benefit, hoping Alina's desire to crush Julian would outweigh her desire to punish the mistress. She stared at the screen for a long, agonizing moment and slammed her finger down on the send button. I sat at my kitchen island, reviewing the structural layouts for my next project, when the email notification chimed on my tablet. I opened Chloe's message and read the frantic proposition with clinical detachment. She thought she could barter her way out of the slaughterhouse by offering up Julian's head. It was a pathetic display of cowardice from a woman who had eagerly participated in my attempted destruction just days prior. She failed to grasp that I did not need her files. My legal trap was already hermetically sealed, backed by forensic accounting and an ironclad trail. Her email was not a bargaining chip. It was a written confession of her own complicity in the embezzlement. I forwarded the plea to my legal team to be entered into the permanent evidentiary record. I did not feel a shred of pity for the woman who had conspired to steal my intellectual property. I tapped reply. I do not negotiate with accomplices. See you in court. I hit send. The notification pinged on Chloe's phone almost instantly. She snatched the device, her heart hammering with desperate hope, only to have the blood turn to ice in her veins as she read the brief rejection. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the floor. The terrifying finality of my rejection shattered the last illusion that she could salvage her life. She sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands as the weight of her choices collapsed upon her. She had thrown away a stellar reputation and her personal freedom for a man who left her defenseless. The conflict ended before it truly began, solidifying my dominance. Julian froze in a concrete box, and Chloe drowned in the wreckage of her own ambition. They turned on each other the moment the pressure dropped, tearing themselves apart, exactly as I had predicted. I closed my tablet and enjoyed the undisturbed silence of my home. The news of Julian's spectacular downfall did not remain contained within the cold concrete walls of his storage unit. The salacious details of his corporate espionage, his humiliating eviction, and the impending federal audit of his father's manufacturing business swept through their elite social circles with the speed of a wildfire. The Emerald Coast Country Club functioned as a vicious, insular ecosystem that thrived on pristine reputations. The toxic stench of a federal investigation was an unforgivable social sin. Diana and Robert walked into their usual Sunday brunch, expecting their customary prime table and deferential greetings. Instead, they walked into a wall of silence. The wealthy executives and local politicians they had spent decades courting suddenly found the ceiling fixtures incredibly fascinating as the disgraced couple passed by. Longtime golfing buddies abruptly canceled tea times, citing vague, unapologetic scheduling conflicts. The women who usually fawned over Diana's expensive jewelry physically turned their backs, their hushed, judgmental whispers carrying clearly across the elegant dining room. The humiliation struck Robert like a physical blow. The manufactured illusion of their flawless aristocratic family legacy disintegrated, replaced by the ugly, unavoidable reality of their son's criminal disgrace. Desperate to salvage whatever fragment of her shattered social standing remained, Diana resorted to the only defense mechanism she truly understood. She retreated to the safety of her curated online persona to play the ultimate victim. Unable to tolerate the agonizing reality of her ruined status, she composed a melodramatic post on her social media page, carefully designed to garner sympathy and reframe the narrative. She attached a highly filtered, tearful photograph of herself clutching a cup of tea, staring mournfully out a rain-streaked window. The accompanying text was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. She omitted any mention of the federal audit, the corporate theft, or Julian's eviction. Instead, she wrote an agonizingly dramatic monologue about the heavy burden of unconditional love. The heartbreak of watching family members lose their way is a heavy cross to bear. I am choosing grace and forgiveness in the face of these mysterious, unspeakable trials. Please pray for those walking a dark path. She urged her followers to pray for her, intentionally framing herself as a tragic, noble matriarch, bravely enduring a storm she had no part in creating. The notifications pinged instantly, a steady stream of gullible friends offering hollow condolences and praising her manufactured strength. For a brief moment, Diana basked in the shallow digital validation, convinced she had successfully manipulated the public narrative. Her digital triumph was extraordinarily short-lived. I had anticipated Diana's inevitable attempt to publicly martyr herself, and I was prepared to extinguish it the moment it materialized. The very second her manipulative post went live, I forwarded a screenshot directly to my legal team with a simple, decisive directive. Execute. Less than an hour later, a private courier arrived at their sprawling suburban estate, hand-delivering a stark, uncompromising cease and desist order from my lead litigator. The heavy stock paper detailed a brutal, undeniable ultimatum that drained the color from Diana's face. My lawyer warned her to immediately retract her defamatory statements and permanently cease all commentary regarding the situation. To ensure her absolute compliance, the notice included a precise, word-for-word transcript of a specific voicemail Diana had left on Julian's phone 2 months prior. It was the exact recording where she aggressively encouraged her son to secretly drain my estate fund, viciously calling me a barren waste of money, and instructing him to invest the stolen cash into his failing venture. The document stated that if she did not completely scrub her online presence within 30 minutes, the unedited audio file would be released to the federal investigators handling Robert's audit, the local press, and every member of the country club board of directors. The threat of total exposure hung over her like a sharpened guillotine. The sheer terror of facing potential criminal liability for conspiracy to commit financial fraud paralyzed her. The realization that I possessed irrefutable proof of her active participation in the theft of my medical funds shattered her delusion of untouchable privilege. She stared at the transcript, her hands trembling as she comprehended the catastrophic damage that single voicemail would inflict upon her remaining connections and her husband's already precarious legal standing. Driven by a frantic, suffocating panic, she grabbed her phone and initiated a total digital blackout. She did not simply delete the post. She permanently deactivated her accounts, wiped her profile, and eradicated every trace of her online existence. The attention-seeking matriarch vanished into absolute, terrified silence. The sprawling mansion that had once been the command center for their judgmental gossip was reduced to an isolated bunker. Robert and Diana remained trapped in a prison of their own making, terrified that any misstep would trigger the release of the damning audio. They could no longer enable Julian. They could no longer manipulate the narrative. The toxic, suffocating grip they held over me for years had shattered. With a single legal maneuver, I neutralized my vicious in-laws, ensuring they would spend the rest of their lives hiding in the shadows of their own disgrace. Weeks later, the battlefield shifted from suburban social warfare to a sterile, windowless conference room in downtown Seattle. The air felt thin and clinical. I sat at the long mahogany table, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer and sipping sparkling water. I was the picture of absolute tranquility. Directly across from me sat the ghost of the man I had once married. Julian looked as though he had aged a decade in a matter of weeks. His bespoke suits had been replaced by an ill-fitting, off-the-rack polyester disaster that hung loosely on his diminished frame. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the harsh fluorescent lights, his eyes darting nervously around the room like a trapped animal. He sat flanked by bottom-tier legal representation, his high-priced counsel having forcefully abandoned him once the retainer check bounced. I did not offer him a nod or a reassuring glance. I watched him sweat, my posture relaxed and unbothered as the court reporter set up her equipment. This was the formal deposition for the civil fraud and corporate espionage suit, the precise arena where his remaining delusions would be dismantled under oath. He tried to catch my eye, projecting a desperate plea for the mercy I had permanently excised from my vocabulary. I looked right through him, treating him as empty space. The heavy oak door swung open. Marcus walked in, carrying a thick binder of forensic digital reports. My head of security had been subpoenaed as the primary expert witness, and he took his seat with a look of supreme satisfaction. He adjusted his glasses, immune to the hostile glares radiating from Julian's side of the table. After being sworn in, Marcus methodically opened his laptop and projected his findings onto the large monitor. With surgical precision, he walked the opposing counsel through the intricate digital labyrinth Julian thought he had navigated. Marcus presented the IP logs tracing the origin of the unauthorized server access directly to Julian's personal devices. He displayed the second-by-second timestamps, mapping Julian's clumsy movements through my firm's internal network. Then came the killing blow. Marcus projected the access logs for the honeypot directory we had explicitly designed for this scenario. He walked the room through the moment Julian initiated the download of the poisoned manifest, explaining how the embedded software triggered the biometric locks and initiated the automated data wipe. The forensic evidence was a masterpiece of indisputable technical prosecution. Marcus explained the encryption protocols Julian had failed to bypass, painting a vivid, undeniable portrait of premeditated corporate theft. Every illicit keystroke stood illuminated in high definition. As the sheer magnitude of the evidence washed over the room, the flimsy defense Julian's lawyer had attempted to construct evaporated. There was no plausible deniability, no convenient scapegoat, and no alternative narrative left to exploit. The reality of his absolute defeat finally penetrated his skull, and the psychological dam holding back his panic ruptured. Julian physically collapsed inward, his shoulders slumping as a ragged, pathetic sob tore from his throat. He buried his face in his trembling hands, the cheap fabric of his suit pulling tight across his shaking back. His lawyer whispered urgent instructions, grabbing his arm to retain some semblance of legal decorum, but Julian ignored him. He lifted his tear-streaked, blotchy face, his breathing shallow, and looked directly at me. He abandoned his Fifth Amendment rights and stammered out a hyperventilating monologue. He cried about the stress of the promotion, the mounting financial pressure, and how much he regretted betraying my trust. It was a repulsive, unfiltered display of weakness, a grown man begging for absolution in front of court reporters. He choked on his tears, explicitly stating how sorry he was for taking the money and accessing the servers, desperately hoping a public display of remorse would magically reverse the damage. I watched his meltdown without a single twitch of emotion. Not a muscle in my face moved. My expression remained as hard as granite. When his pathetic apologies tapered off into wet, ragged gasps, the silence in the room became deafening. I slowly placed my glass down on the mahogany table. The quiet clink echoed against the walls. Without looking at Julian, I turned to my lead attorney. In a voice devoid of warmth, hesitation, or pity, I delivered my instruction. Please note for the record that the opposing counsel's client has offered a voluntary admission of guilt to all charges of embezzlement and corporate espionage. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes widening in horror as the lethal nature of my maneuver registered. His own lawyer groaned, dropping his pen onto the table in total defeat. I had taken his desperate plea for mercy and weaponized it into the final nail in his legal coffin. I held his devastated gaze, eyes devoid of any lingering humanity. It was the ultimate display of unyielding strength. The devastating effectiveness of that deposition transformed the final court hearing into a swift, clinical execution. Sitting at the plaintiff's table in the polished oak courtroom weeks later, I maintained a serene composure as the judge reviewed the mountain of evidence. When the ruling arrived, it echoed through the cavernous room with lethal finality. The verdict was a catastrophic defeat for Julian. The judge did not just rule in my favor, he delivered a financial obliteration. The defendant is ordered to pay full restitution of the $60,000 stolen, plus punitive damages for malicious marital fraud. Julian flinched as the astronomical figures became public record. The color drained from his ashen face. His lawyer sat motionless, offering no resistance against the tide of forensic proof. The gavel struck with a sharp, echoing crack, legally cementing my total victory and classifying Julian's actions as criminal. Because my traps had successfully seized his remaining capital, the court recognized his total lack of liquid assets. To circumvent his inability to pay, the judge implemented a ruthless, inescapable contingency plan. The court authorizes maximum wage garnishment, a non-negotiable percentage of all future income generated by the defendant will be siphoned into a trust controlled by the plaintiff. This was a permanent financial leash. Julian slumped forward, burying his head in his arms. He would never again experience the thrill of a full deposit. I listened with profound satisfaction as the court outlined a bleak future where Julian functioned as my indentured servant. I had reached into his future and confiscated every ounce of his earning potential. Before adjourning, the judge directed his piercing gaze toward the defense table, delivering a blistering reprimand that would echo through the legal community for decades. He dismantled Julian's character, citing the breathtaking arrogance and cowardice required to steal medical funds meant for his own future children. He did not spare Chloe, who sat trembling in the back row. He publicly admonished them both for their reckless, unethical corporate espionage. The detailed transcripts, outlining their embezzlement and theft, would automatically populate on every background check and executive screening for the rest of their lives. I had successfully burned their professional identities to the ground. As the courtroom cleared, Julian scrambled up from the table, stumbling toward me before my legal team could intercept him. His eyes were wild and brimming with hollow desperation. He reached out, his hands trembling inches from my coat. "Alina, please, lift the garnishments, I have nothing. Show me a shred of mercy." I stopped and turned to face him. I adjusted the collar of my wool coat, smoothing an invisible crease with unhurried precision. I did not offer a smile, a scowl, or a syllable of acknowledgement. I looked through him as if he were empty space and walked out the double doors into the blinding, beautiful sunlight. 1 year later, that sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office suite. I stood perfectly still, looking over the city's skyline, sipping a freshly brewed espresso. The transition from betrayed wife to untouchable executive had been absolute. Following the annihilation of Julian's scheme, the board of the architecture firm had called an emergency meeting. They were terrified by the magnitude of my ruthless efficiency in protecting their data. They did not offer me a raise. They restructured the hierarchy and named me CEO. Now, my name sat in bold silver, lettering on the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. Those ghosts of my past were drowning in the consequences of their own arrogance. Julian's existence had been reduced to a miserable grind. Stripped of his corporate facade and permanently blacklisted, he worked at an entry-level retail job selling electronics in a dying strip mall. Every other Friday, he stared at a meager paycheck that was decimated by the wage garnishment before he could even touch the funds. Chloe had met an equally satisfying demise. The weight of federal litigation and the total destruction of her reputation had bankrupted her. Unable to afford her life in the city, she had suffered the ultimate social humiliation, moving back into her childhood bedroom in a dead-end town. Later that evening, the rich aroma of slow-roasted duck drifted through my pristine penthouse kitchen. Seated around my mahogany table were the only people who had proven their loyalty when the world collapsed. Cassidy laughed brightly, her energy filling the room. Beside her sat Marcus, enjoying the fruits of his digital counteroffensive. There was no toxic family drama, no passive-aggressive jabs, and zero pressure to perform for narcissists. This gathering was built on genuine love and shared triumph. We clinked our glasses together in a loud, joyous toast. To the life we built on our own terms. This was my chosen family, a circle of brilliant, capable individuals who protected each other. Looking at their faces illuminated by candlelight, I felt a deep, resonant joy Julian could never have understood. As the evening wound down, I stepped onto my private balcony. I leaned against the railing, reflecting on the journey that brought me to this moment. It felt like a lifetime had passed since that dinner at the bistro where I sat silently while my worth was dismissed by people conspiring against me. I had allowed myself to be cast as the oblivious scapegoat, but demanding justice had unlocked an empowerment I never knew I possessed. Your value is never determined by people who fail to see it. Refusing to be manipulated and refusing to carry the burden of someone else's insecurities is the most powerful choice a person can make. I reclaimed my narrative the moment I stopped accepting their cruelty as my normal. Now I stand at the pinnacle of my life, completely unbothered by the wreckage they created. Empowerment does not stem from vindictive revenge, but from establishing unbreakable boundaries and constructing a life where manipulation can no longer reach you. Loyalty should never excuse abuse. Walk away from the toxic, reclaim your worth, and watch how the world opens up when you finally choose yourself.